Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bates Botanical Bootcamp. Today we are talking about growing cactus indoors as a houseplant. So a lot of you, especially here in Middle Tennessee, are not able to leave most varieties, probably 99%, if not more, outside year-round. So we're going to discuss how to keep them healthy indoors, what options you have when spring and summer rolls around, and maybe you want to put some outside. Cacti are my favorite grouping of houseplants. I have a huge collection at my house that I run into all the time. They're great. They're low maintenance, they're low water, high light, so easy to take care of. They thrive on neglect. They're great for kids as long as they don't touch them a lot. There are some spineless varieties that we will talk about today. But as always with our webinars here at Bates Nursery, if you have any questions at all, feel free to type them in the chat box on Zoom or in the comments on Facebook. We will also open the floor towards the end for Q&A. But again, at any time, if you have a question about something I am referring to, feel free to ask those questions. So like I said, they are great kind of beginner houseplants for people who are just now getting into it, maybe have a ton of light or are not home very often. There are a lot of new builds around Nashville, and I help a lot of people get new plants for their homes because they have such high light. I usually refer them to Cactus, especially because they're new to houseplants and they're not sure how to care for them. They can go a very long time without being watered. There's so many fun facts about cacti, but they can hold their own, they retain water and they can hold it for years upon years. So they could actually go a very, very long time without being watered. It's not necessarily the best thing for them, but you know, if you were to forget to water your cactus for 5-6 months, which I've actually done before, they will be just fine. So I'm going to start by talking about pots for your cactus and soil, because that can be a little bit different than most leafy houseplants. So I usually suggest getting a terracotta, non-glazed terracotta pot for your cactus that does have drain holes. So this is a lovely one that we have here at Bates. If you notice, the inside is not glazed. A lot of the time it will have a terracotta look. It will be terracotta, but they will glaze the inside. So you want to look for that chalky finish. You don't want it to be shiny. And like I said, that terracotta is going to help wick moisture out of the soil. So if you tend to be an overwaterer, you definitely want to go with a terracotta clay pot. Now, with that being said, you don't have to use these. You can use ceramic, you can use plastic, as long as it has really good drainage. But these are very price friendly, and like I said, they're going to help control that moisture in the soil when you don't want that cactus to stay too wet. So talking about soil, you can find cactus and succulent soil mixes at garden centers, hardware stores, all around town, wherever you happen to live. So this is what we have here at Bates. This is our cactus succulent mix. It's the Spoma. So you could use an already mixed soil blend, or you can make your own, which I actually prefer doing. These are great, these cactus succulent soils that come already prepared, but I do find that they have a lot of peat moss in them, which I don't particularly love for quite a few reasons. So I tend to make my own. We have Earth Mix, which is right behind me, Proganics I, which is our indoor soil mix. I will use that with my cactus. I will mix perlite in with it. And if you don't know what perlite is, it really helps with drainage and kind of aerating the soil. But when you get, usually in indoor soil, sometimes in some outdoor soil mixes, you will see these little white kind of styrofoam almost looking additions to your soil. So this is what it is, and I will mix some of that in with my soil along with pine fines, which pine fines is a shreddy, that's a fun word, finely shredded pine mulch that I will mix in with that soil to help aerate it, help keep it dry, and make sure that soil doesn't get too compact, because they like to stay dry. I cannot emphasize enough that they do not want to stay wet. So when you think about where they grow naturally, Tyler, where do you see cactus growing?
Actually, I'm going to say the Cedar Glades of Tennessee.
Well, you know, that is a good I was going to say perspective, not quite the word I'm looking for.
But the desert.
The desert, yes. But you said Cedar Glades of Tennessee. We actually do have a native cactus that does grow where the cedars grow here in Middle Tennessee. It's a low-growing prickly pear that is edible, and it is native here to Middle Tennessee. But yes, his second answer was more of what I was looking for. They primarily grow in the desert. So when you think of the desert, you think of dry. You think of sandy, hot, sun, cowboys, lizards, really cool flowers.
All that.
So that is the climate that you want to make for your cactus. So we have talked about those pots that you want to put your cactus in. Again, the most important thing is that it has at least one drain hole on the bottom of that pot. And we've talked about our soil blend that we want to use for it. So now we're going to talk about lighting. I'm sure you all know that cactus require at least 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight, depending on the variety of cacti you have. Some will want a little bit less. They'll get a little stressed out if they get too much sun. But generally speaking, all cacti need some amount of direct sunlight. This is kind of a fun fact, which you guys probably know, but all cacti are succulents, but all succulents are not cacti. So when I'm talking today, I am talking about specifically true cactus. Succulents, people kind of lump them together, but there are a lot of succulents that don't like direct sun. So we were just specifically talking about cactus. So like I said, 4 to 6 hours of sunlight. If you don't get that much sunlight, you can always supplement with a grow light if you do keep your cactus indoor year round. They usually want more red light to blue light ratio. And with it, you want to leave it on like 12 to 14 hours a day to make sure it's getting plenty of sun. If there's no natural sunlight coming through your room, you'll probably want to leave it on like maybe 16, 18 hours is pushing it, but it's going to need quite a bit of sunlight to, grow happy. So you have the option of moving your cactus outside in the spring or summer or keeping it indoors. So we're going to kind of talk about the pros and cons of each. So first, I'm going to talk about moving them outdoors, which is what I do with all of my cactus every mid-spring. I usually wait till Mother's Day. People say tax day for tomatoes, which sounds like it would be right for cactus, but I wait for Mother's Day here in our zone 7, to start moving my plants outside. I wait until the temperatures at night stay consistently at about 46 degrees, because sometimes we can get like a late pop. It'll freeze and you will quickly lose all of your cactus. So when I move mine outside, depending on the variety, but for the most part, I will acclimate them to sun because they can get sunburn. You think cactus are tough, you think they're cool, they can handle anything. They will sunburn very quickly, and a lot of the varieties will not come back from being sunburnt. It doesn't mean they're dead. It'll just give it kind of an off-color look as it starts to grow, and it'll keep it for a little while. Sometimes it looks pretty cool. So when I say acclimating, you don't want to just stick it right out in the sun. So if you've got a full sun spot that gets sun for like 8 hours a day, you don't want to take that cactus from being inside all winter and just stick it out in that full sun. I will put mine on my front porch, which has an awning and gets some soft, direct morning light. And then I'll move it out a little further and give it about a week or so before, a week or 2 weeks before I get it out in full sun. So, like I said, they like that sun, and then I'm going to let them get watered on. So I do not water my cactus that I put outside in the spring and summer. I just let the rain water them. So I don't take the hose when I'm watering my perennials, when I'm watering any of my new plantings or any of my leafy plants. I just let them sit. We even had a drought here in Middle Tennessee this year. We just now started getting rain, and I never watered my cactus, but they did start to grow. And I really don't worry about pulling them under. People ask me that all the time. They're like, well, if I put it outside and it's getting rained on, do I need to pull it back? For me personally, my answer is no. I use a good, well-draining soil mix. And like I said, I use terracotta, and I've never had an issue with my plants rotting, even when we were getting like a ton of rain. So I will leave them out. If you're concerned about it or you're new to it, you can move them in and out. But like I said, for me personally, that is not something that I feel the need to do. So moving your plants outside, they can get plenty of sunlight, and generally speaking, you don't have to worry about necessarily watering them. And I've noticed with moving my cacti outside in the spring and summer, I get more flowers than I would keeping them inside. If you did not know that cactus bloom, they do. Just about all of them do. And I think they have the most spectacular blooms of any plant on this planet. Their blooms are primarily white, yellow, pink, and red. They're gorgeous, and what's cool is a lot of them open up at night. So a lot of them are night bloomers. You'll see the buds coming out for sometimes weeks while you wait for them to open. They'll open at night, and if you sleep through it, you'll miss it, and they close back up. A lot of their pollinators are bats, which is also a fun fact about them. And bats are nocturnal, so they'll come out at night, feed off of those flowers, and pollinate your plants. So if you want to grow them inside, totally doable. Like I said, they like a dry, low humidity climate. So right now with your house, probably having your AC on, the humidity is perfect. They usually like to stay at 40 to 60%, which most households will sit out most of the time. One big thing you have to watch for when you keep them inside is making sure they're getting even light. So I would pick one spot, stick to it, and if it's not getting a ton of light that's coming from up above, you'll want to turn that cactus. Because if they're not getting a lot of even light, they're going to start growing with this really strange growing habit. They'll start to get kind of thin up top because they're reaching for light. So they do naturally grow like this, but if they're not getting the right light source and also the right water source, they will start to, like I said, take on these weird growth habits where they'll start reaching for light. It's kind of cool, but it's really weird looking. They'll get big and then smaller. So if you have it inside, you'll want to rotate it. And also if you keep yours inside year round, like I touched on earlier in the webinar, you'll be able to use artificial lighting. So you don't necessarily have to have that natural light, which they will do a little bit better in, but you can supplement with grow lights. So keeping them inside also will probably deter pests a lot more, especially if you're not bringing in a lot of new house plants and introducing them into your home. So pests won't be as much of an issue if you do keep your plants inside year round. So those are kind of a little bit of the differences outdoor versus indoor. And now we're just going to start talking about fertilizing your cactus. I don't fertilize all of my cactus, and they don't need it as much as most other plants. They're not heavy feeders, and they don't necessarily need it for a while. But I do every so often fertilize most of mine. But like I said, not as regularly as I do like my leafy houseplants, my philodendrons, some plants that flower, and my annuals that I keep on my front porch that look amazing right now. But with fertilization with cactus, you can use a general 10-10-10 fertilizer. I dilute it at a quarter strength, so it doesn't need to be really strong. But you can also get a cactus succulent fertilizer that's going to have a lower nitrogen count, which we have right here. And they'll usually have directions on how to dilute it. And you'll feed that cactus when you water it. It has a lower nitrogen count, so the first number is lower than the other two. But like I said, if you've got just an all-purpose plant food, which I also have right here, that will work as well. It's not going to hurt your plant. But like I said, I do dilute it more than I would with other plants that I am feeding. Now, when you fertilize it, whether it is outside or inside, I suggest fertilizing spring and summer. So I start fertilizing, I would say, with cacti and succulents mid-April, which is a little bit later than I start feeding my leafy plants. So mid-April, when the temperatures are really starting to warm up a little bit more, or even end of April, I will start feeding it at a quarter strength. And then I will feed them, depending on the variety, every 2 to 4 weeks. Some I will feed more than others. And you'll want to read and research your new plant friend or your old plant friend if you haven't fertilized it before to kind of find out what it needs. So spring and summer, and I will usually start tapering off towards the end of July, mid-August. I highly suggest letting your cacti go dormant in the winter. Now, when I say dormant, you might think of trees who lose their leaves and go dormant and look dead. It's not what I mean. I'm not saying we want your cactus to look dead in the winter. But for me personally, I don't want them to grow at all. A lot of mine will flower in the winter, but they won't push new growth for that columnar look. And the reason why that is for me, they do need time to rest, but also with them being inside and with the days being shorter. So whether they're inside or outside, to me, it's not specific. Our days get so short that they're not getting enough light. And with that, like I was talking about growth habits, if you're pushing new growth, if you're fertilizing it and wanting it to get bigger, chances are it's going to grow quite different than it would in the spring and summer when it's getting the correct light. So it will probably have a thinner growth habit. And then when spring and summer rolls around, when the sun's out, even though plants are inside, they do know the seasons are changing, which is insane. It's so cool. All plants are the coolest thing ever. But then that plant will start pushing new growth like it naturally would, and that's going to get bigger. So your cactus will start to have this hourglass shape where it will grow up and down, which has happened to me with a few. And what I've done is just chopped the cactus, which we will talk about later, and propped it. Because it gets so heavy up top where it had that new healthy growth, it'll start to lean a little bit in fall. So fertilizing your cactus, spring and summer, which generally is what you'd want to do with most houseplants. Now there are some that I'll feed in the winter that are like winter bloomers. Those are a little bit different. But generally, I like to let most of my plants go pretty dormant, have like a little resting period in the wintertime when we're all hibernating. Your plant should be hibernating with you as well. So are there any questions on fertilizing and feeding your cactus?
No, but we got one follow-up just now. What do you recommend specifically for bats to encourage them to pollinate?
For bats to pollinate, I mean, what you would want to do is basically get your cactus to flower, because that's what's going to attract those bats to pollinate your cacti. So fertilizing is going to help with blooming and also getting sunlight. So the reason why mine really push a lot of buds, mine bloom like midsummer, except for my Peruvian apple cactus. It loves to bloom in the winter, but we're not going to talk about that one right now. So if you want them to bloom summer when they're outside to attract bats or other pollinators, it's not just bats that are going to pollinate it. It's kind of specific to what kind of cacti you have. When I have mine inside, they're not getting as much light. Like I said, because I have so many cactus, sometimes I have some sitting like in my living room that don't get any direct sunlight. They look fantastic through the winter. They're sitting in darkness, they go dormant. Now, when I put it outside, it's starting to get that much sun. I fertilize it. It really starts reacting to all of those great things that it's getting. And that's when mine start to push out buds for those flowers to open. So in order to attract those bats or pollinators, whatever is going to pollinate your cactus, you will want to really promote flowering to get those pollinators to flock to your little cactus and hopefully pollinate it.
And is it better for your cactus to stay in pots outside, or can it be planted in the ground once acclimated?
That's a great question. I usually, if I have a cactus or houseplant that has to come in the winter, that cannot stay out in the, has to come out, cannot stay out in the winter, I won't plant them in ground. I will leave them in the pots. What I usually will do, if I run out of space on my porch, which I do, I will set them around my garden beds. I'll keep them in their pots and just kind of place them in different spots. Now, what I have done before, not with cactus, I've done it with more leafy houseplants, is I will dig a hole and keep my houseplant in that pot and just sink the pot in the ground. So it looks like it's growing out of the ground, and then when fall, early winter comes, I will just pull it up and bring it inside. Now, with doing that with cactus, the only thing that I would worry about is it getting too much moisture and rotting in the ground. But that'd be a great thing to try just to see how it does. I mean, you'll probably get a lot of growth with you having it in the ground, so you'll have to pot up once you go to dig it up and bring it inside in the winter. Now, there are a few cactus, like I mentioned earlier, that can overwinter here in Middle Tennessee. Unfortunately, I don't have any in here right now. This Gomi Blue is, I believe, marginally hardy here. You might lose it, but it's a type of prickly pear. And we have a prickly pear that is native here in Middle Tennessee. And there also are a few other prickly pears that will overwinter here. I have them all over my front yard and I love them. I have the larger round prickly pear. It blooms yellow in the early summer, and mine actually produces fruit. So like we were talking about with those pollinators, if you can get some pollinators in there, you will get some fruit off of your cactus. I don't know if it has produced any fruit this year, though, come to think of it. But it stays green through the winter. It's a great focal point for your beds because most things are dormant through the winter. Like I said, it stays green. It's not going to flower, but it's also not going to lose its color. I really love how my prickly pear looks, and it grows like crazy. It's low maintenance, like I said. My prickly pear that I have outside, I never fertilize. I never water. I rarely look at it just because it loves neglect. And the other type of cacti, it is a type of prickly pear, but I call it cholla. It's Cholla, and we did have some varieties here at Bates Nursery earlier this year, and it's more of a cylindrical growth. So instead of like the round pads, it's got an upright growth, and there are some that get as tall as trees. They're called tree chollas, and then there's some that stay small. With chollas, they usually bloom yellow and red, and they're gorgeous. But those are the two that you can leave outside. And I've had a cholla and a prickly pear that I've left in pots outside as well as in the ground, and they do fine in either. But yeah, that's a great question about putting them in ground and then bringing them in. All right, let's talk about watering. We did touch on that when I talked about indoor versus outdoor. But cactus are way different from your other houseplants. So if you keep it inside year round, you're not going to be on the same watering schedule as your calothea, as your philodendron, pothos. A lot of people want to have plants that they water a certain day once a week. I help a lot of customers that come in here and they've looked at cacti and succulent and they're like, well, can I water it every Thursday with the rest of my plants? And I say, absolutely not. And they say, well, I'm going to. That might be a death sentence for your cactus. So you have to adjust your watering schedule based off of the plant's needs. That goes for any house plant that you're introducing into your environment. With cacti, let them dry out completely. Like we talked about earlier, they come from a dry desert climate, or most of them do. There are some that come from rainforests that are more of an epiphyte. We'll touch on that in just a moment. So you want that soil to be completely dry, even to the point to where it like wicks, to where it pulls from the pot. So there's like a little bit of space between the soil and your pot. Then when you go to water it, I suggest thoroughly watering it all the way through. So where water drains out of the bottom of the pot, it's going to help flush salts out of your soil. It just helps get to the lower roots of your plant. If you give it, sometimes people think, oh, it needs a teaspoon of water and it'll be fine. That's going to promote shallow root growth because all the moisture is going to stay on the top of the plant. Those roots are primarily going to be healthiest at the top of the soil line. So when your cactus starts growing taller, it's going to start falling over because it doesn't have deep, well-rooted root system to actually hold it in. So let it dry out completely, thoroughly water it, and you'll be watering it a lot more April through August and even September when those days are longer and the temperatures are a lot warmer, whether it's inside or outside. Now in the winter, some of my cacti I don't even water once. I just put them inside and walk away. You'll want to look, keep an eye on them. They'll start to some will, not all, will start to shrivel up slightly when they do need water. So I'll keep an eye on a lot of my cacti in the winter to see if they start to look thirsty, and if so, I'll water them. But the biggest thing in the winter is root rot with your cactus, is overwatering. It'll rot your roots, or you'll get some rot like at the base of your cactus. The whole thing will fall down, and then you'll lose it so fast. There's really no coming back from that. So don't overwater it in the winter like we've talked about already. Let them go dormant. Let them rest. They don't really need to be growing in the winter. So cut out fertilizing, cut out watering. And if you don't have enough light, if you bring them outside and then bring them in the winter, like I talked about, they can sit in a dark place. That is what I do with mine. They don't grow at all. I put them outside and I will get 4 feet of growth in the spring and summer. So cactus will grow really quickly. Cactus are unlike any other plant on this planet. They have these expandable little cells in them that hold water. So they can hold water for up to, I mean, some can hold, I don't know how many years and years they can keep water inside. So if you look at cactus, you'll see how plump and, beautiful they are. Look at her. So that's from being able to retain its own water in case, they go through a drought. They're desert creatures. They know how to take care of themselves. So they're retaining water, within themselves. So then if, like I said, if there's a drought, they're not going to shrivel up and die. You think about your calathea, your philodendron, all those leafy plants, which I love. But if they went without water for a month, what are they going to look like, Tyler?
Brown,
wilty, crispy, and super sad. Your cactus is going to look gorgeous and pretty much hold that shape. So I just think it's so cool. And there are some cactus that you can cut and drink water from if you're stuck in the desert, but there's a lot that will poison you if you try to do that. So before you go to the desert, if you think you might get lost, make sure you do some research. Also inside the cactus are these little, you can call them flutes that grow upwards with the cacti that help with that water retention. So when you cut your cactus, if you've just watered it, if you go to prop it, if it breaks and you look inside, you won't see them until the cactus starts to dry out. So if your cactus dries out, if you open it, if you like, dissecting plants, which is really cool to do, and looking at all the pieces inside. Once that cactus dries out, you'll notice these little flute-looking lines, and that's what that is. They'll expand and they'll help with that water retention. And then once that plant dries out, they'll shrivel up and you'll be able to see them. So we've talked about watering, not overwatering. Keep them dry. You can keep them dry for years. I do have a fun story. One of my favorite cacti that I have, I was at an estate sale about probably 8 years ago, and it was out in the middle of nowhere, and there were all these greenhouses, and I walked up, and I have been obsessed with cactus since I was probably 4 years old. And there were all these pots of dead cacti everywhere, and there were 2 greenhouses that you could tell had been out of commission for years upon years. I walked into the house, and there were all these books on cactus. Needless to say, I bought a ton of books and photos and anything I could find. And I did ask if I could go into the greenhouses to see if I, wanted anything in there. And they were like, yeah, sure. At your own risk, you'll probably get bit by a spider. So I walk into the greenhouse, dead cacti everywhere. It was heartbreaking. But then I found one cactus that was still alive. And this cactus probably had not been watered in 8 years. I mean, nobody had lived in this house for a long time. It was covered. I don't know how it survived winter because it's not a cold hardy cactus. But I brought it home and I still have it. It grows. I've propped it. It's probably about 5 feet tall now. It's a really, really slow growing cactus. And I still haven't been able to fully ID it yet because there's so many different kinds of cacti. I have a general idea of what it is, but not the specific variety. But it was able to hold its water. It retained that water for years and years, maybe even a decade. And when I found it, it didn't look amazing. It didn't look like something that you would want to buy at a nursery, but it was still alive, and it is probably my favorite cactus to this day. And if I ever kill it, I will be so very sad. But yeah, fun cactus story. So we're going to talk about a couple things that cactus will do. We'll talk about pests. We will talk about the rainforest lower light cacti that I do have here. But first, we're going to talk about corking, which I don't have any cacti in here that are currently doing that. And I'll have people bring in photos at the nursery, or they'll see some of our very large specimen cactus that we have that are like 7 feet tall. And towards the base, and even sometimes towards the center, you'll notice like a tan browning color happening on the cactus, and that is called corking. So it's also another defense mechanism. I mean, they have evolved to be able to survive anything and take care of themselves. So corking happens when they start to grow really large and get heavy, or if they are getting if they're growing in a spot with high winds. So that corking will happen, and what it is, it's basically hardening of the plant. Like a tree, when it's growing, its tree trunk expands and gets really darker brown. It grows that bark and it gets really strong. You can't bend that plant anymore. You can't even push it over. That's basically what your cactus is doing. It's just to protect it from falling over, keeping it stronger, and keeping it nice and healthy and alive. So It's nothing bad at all. Doesn't mean your plant's dying. It doesn't mean there's a fungal or bacterial problem with it. It's not a pest. It's actually natural and a really, really good thing. It means your plant's healthy and it's learned its environment and it's adapting. I have a very large Euphorbia candelabra cactus, which isn't a true cactus. It is a euphorbia. Instead of having spines, it has thorns, and it also has this white sap. So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But I have one that I started from a propagation. It was a cutting about this tall, and now it's probably about 3 feet wide and 7 feet tall. And at the base, it's completely brown. It's like not a dark, almost black brown, but it's like a tan brown. And it's just so sturdy. And I love it so much. So corking is a good thing. If that starts to happen with your cacti, it's good. If it is a dark, dark brown and kind of mushy, that is not corking. That's probably rot. It came from overwatering. Could be a fungal problem with your cacti, and you'll need to cut that off. So we'll go ahead and transition from corking into talking about what to do with root rot or just general rot on your cactus.
We do have a corking-related question here.
Yes.
I have a Thanksgiving cactus that may be corking. Is that possible? I have been wondering what is wrong with it.
It is possible. I've had one. I actually got it at an estate sale. I love to buy old people's plants. It is my absolute favorite thing to do. I bought it from an elderly woman about 5 years ago, and it's huge. And it has started corking. And it'll be that light tan color. And as the Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter cactus will start to grow, it will kind of start to split off. It looks like basically a really dry desert after it rains and then dries. So it's probably corking. Like I said, if it's like a light brown, that's what you want to look for. Now, if it's darker and kind of mushy, you might have a little bit of rot. You could take a picture and put it in the comments if you're around that cactus, or you can also email it to us and we can take a look at it. But more than likely, that's what it is if it's an older, more mature plant and it's getting pretty big, because they will start to kind of drape down. So towards the base of the stem, like soil line, that's where it primarily will be. Now, if it's rot with that Thanksgiving cactus, with any other cactus, if it's happening at the base, that's really problematic and can be a little bit upsetting. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to lose your plant, but you do have to take care of it. You can't just let it sit. So I'm going to bring up a little.
He said light brown and striated.
And what?
Striated?
That's probably it. I would love to see a photo if he wanted to email one to info@batesnursery.com. But I would also check it for pests just to make sure there's not some kind of worm or something that's making those ridges. So I'm going to bring up this very healthy blue torch cactus. So if this was getting some kind of rot, you would start to notice it towards the base because, like I said, it generally comes from overwatering or having too much humidity. It's going to start here. I usually notice it as like a little black dot or dark brown, and then it very, very quickly will start spreading around the base of your cactus and then up. So what I suggest doing is removing the top of the plant. And if your cacti is big enough, I would move at least an inch above that rot spot, if not more, because it will keep eating up through that plant, and just cut it. Get rid of the soil, throw out the base of the plant that was rotten, and then let the top part callus over. And hopefully you've saved it and you'll be able to put it in a pot where it's going to grow a new plant. And I actually have one of my favorite kinds of cactus. I call this roadkill cactus. Some people call it Romeo. This is a little pad that fell off of one of our plants here at the nursery. So if I was propagating this, I've talked about this blue flame cactus. If you chopped it, this is pretty much the same thing. So this actually broke off recently. And if you look at the bottom, you'll notice that it's still pretty white in color. And you can see that it's fairly moist still. So you'll want to let that callus over. Or if you took a cutting from one of your, more upright cylindrical cacti, if you took a straight cutting, let that callus over. And it usually takes about 2 weeks for that to happen. When I say callus over, I mean, it's like if you fell down and got some road rash, it's like a scab. So it's like a hard outer protective layering that's going to form on the plant. And then once that happens, you'll want to stick it in some cactus soil mix. I suggest using a little bit more perlite than soil than like a normal potting mix. Put it in there. I water mine all the way through and then let it dry out. And you will be astonished how quickly cacti will start to grow roots, especially if you take, prickly pear is insane. Those will root very, very fast. You can use rooting hormone, but for the most part, they'll grow without it. So I'm going to show you this prickly pear that one of our landscape specialists, Austin, who does a lot of our webinars here at Bates Nursery, his brother in Texas gave him one pad from this little prickly pear cactus that already has a new one, and he brought it in and I potted it up for him, I would say like a month or two ago, and look at that. Look how quickly it rooted and then grew a whole new pup. So it was just one pad that he got in. Like I said, about 2 months ago, I potted it up. It was calloused over. And it actually, I think he had it in a Ziploc baggie for like a month or so. And I think he lost it. So that's how quickly they can, or how long they can sit without being in soil. It grew its roots and then it pushed new growth. And look at that. Oh, so cactus, I mean, they're so easy. They're low maintenance. They're fun. They're exciting. And they will grow literally anywhere, especially the prickly pear variety like the one I just showed you, or this Gomi blue right here. If you notice where their spines normally will come out, they will also grow roots from here. So if this pad were to fall off onto the ground, it will start rooting from here and then pushing new pups from up top. I removed a bunch of prickly pear from one of my garden beds and got a little bit lazy because it got hot outside. And they sat on my driveway for like 4 months, and they're just growing on the asphalt, and they even bloomed. So I need to move those because they look great. They're healthy plants, but it's a little bit sad just looking at them grow on the driveway. So I should take care of that. But I mean, they're not invasive or anything, but they do grow like crazy. They will take over, but they're easy to control as long as you don't get those spines in your fingers. Tyler, you look like you were about to say something.
No, just sounds like a little bit of renegade horticulture to me.
It is. I like to experiment with I like to experiment with plants. Cactus can take so much neglect. The only thing that they can't handle is moisture and freezing temperatures. So other than that, they will live for a long time. And speaking of moisture and humidity, a lot of people mist their plants. There are some plants that I do mist. It's probably out of my 200 houseplants, I might have 8 that I will mist. Generally speaking, misting your plants, misting the leaves will cause fungal and bacterial problems. So I suggest just using a humidifier if you need humidity for some of your leafy houseplants. But cactus do not like humidity. So I suggest not misting them and really not keeping them near a humidifier. Mine love my house in the winter because it is so dry. Okay, so we talked a little bit about euphorbia cactus. So I'm going to bring this one over here. If I can get it out without knocking some cactus. There we go. Oh. So this is not a true cactus. It's a euphorbia, which is a very, very broad, I put that cactus right in front of my face, Tyler.
You sure did.
Sure did. Just hide behind her. So this is in the same family as poinsettia, which is insane. It looks totally different. There's a lot of annuals that you will see in nurseries and people's landscaping that are also euphorbia. So it's a very broad category. But if I were to cut into this beautiful cactus, which I'm not going to do because she's perfect, instead of it just kind of being like moist, watery, like we looked at with our roadkill cactus, it's going to start to leak a white sap. So that's a good way to know if you have a euphorbia instead of like a true cactus. It also has thorns instead of spines, which can be more forgiving than the spines. But their care is pretty much the same as all other cacti. And I do notice with the euphorbia types of cacti, they seem to be a lot more pest resistant than other ones, which don't worry. We will talk about pests because I have a fun pest treating tool to talk about. But let's just take a moment to really take in the beauty of this amok euphorbia. Tyler, can we get the detail camera up on her? Yeah, there we go. So there's a lot of variegation in this. She's got dark green and light green. I mean, this cactus is gorgeous. I don't have one, and I'm a little bit envious of this one sitting right here, and I might have to take it home with me. But yep, so any questions on that? One thing you want to watch for them is that sap is toxic. So if you have pets, you'll want to keep this away from your pets, and don't get it in your eyes or eat it.
One question, how do you cut into cactus?
That is a great question. Let's see. Tyler, talk for a moment. I'm going to disappear.
Well, because I don't know the answer to this question, I'm going to just tell you that in August, we have a great slate of webinars coming up, starting with sowing fall seeds. So stick around. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay,
so with cutting into cactus, I'm going to do it with this Romeo cactus, and I'm going to mimic it on a few of these. So I'm going to take this little geometrizon cactus. It's kind of like a little blue chalk cactus. So if I were to get root rot on it, or if I wanted to prop it, I'm going to take a sterile, clean knife. You can just wash it with rubbing alcohol. And then I'm going to take a nice clean cut straight across the plant. So all the way across. Take that top piece off. Let it callus for at least 2 weeks, like we talked about, in a nice, cool, dark place. Doesn't need to be getting any direct sunlight. And then you can, a lot of the times I will place it in the same pot so it just fills it out, or you can put it in a new pot. Now that spot where you took the cutting, so let's say this top part was off the cactus, it's going to start to push like 1 to 3 new little pups, new little growth spots. So similar to this prickly pear, it'll start to push new arms, and you'll have an even fuller plant. I chop most of my cactus. The euphorbia cacti can also be chopped. That's how I got my original one. My candelabra that I was talking about earlier was just from a cutting. I just took an arm. You can also clean cut the top, and it will push new growth. I mean, there is a chance that when you cut on your plants that it is going to damage it and it won't grow anything, but that has actually, I'm trying to think as far as cacti goes, it's never happened to me. It has always pushed new growth. Now, I did have one Peruvian apple cactus, which is right here, that I took a cutting from, and it took about 8 months for it to push any new growth. I thought it was a goner, but don't give up on them. It doesn't mean they are. So like I said, you'll want to cut. I mean, you don't have to even, for me, I don't really look at where the spines are per se. I'll usually try to get a little bit above, because a lot of times it'll push right above it. And it's not the prettiest of looks once you do cut it. It tends to, on a big cacti, turn a little bit brown before it really calluses over. But yeah, and in a few years, it'll fill that in and you'll have a nice full cactus. So with a lot of different varieties of cacti, especially the Peruvian apple cactus, which is right here. It's a night bloomer. It's one that is pollinated by bats. It grows really quickly. People think that because it's a cactus, it's going to grow really slow. Like this took 200 years to grow like this. Not true at all. They grow really quickly. I've actually surprised quite a few of our landscape specialists here by letting them know how quickly my cacti grow. And when we get them in, I'll show them all the new growth we've gotten on it. My Peruvian apple cactus has grown at like 4 feet in a year before. It grows very, very fast. Now, again, it's actively growing for me in the spring and summer because that's when I want it to grow. That's when it's healthiest, when the conditions are best for it, and when it's not going to have very, very strange, weird growth habits. But with it growing so quickly and having to bring it inside in the winter, not all of us have 20-foot tall ceilings. I definitely do not. I live in a very old farmhouse, and I can touch my ceiling. So I have had to chop my main mother plant about 3 times now. If I hadn't cut her back, I would say it would have at least reached 17 feet, if not more. So when you do cut it, if your cacti is starting to outgrow its space, if it's one of the upright growers, cut it like I talked about with that little geometrizon. It's all the same. Take a nice, very sharp, sterile knife. You don't want to use pruners because that's just going to squeeze the cactus together and then cut it. So use a nice sharp knife. Take that clean cut. And if you're cutting it for space reasons, for height, you'll want to take it down a couple feet because, like I said, it's going to push new arms 1 to 3, maybe 4 if you're really lucky, out of that. And then it's going to grow up. You'll have to cut it sooner rather than later if you don't cut short enough. So you can take that cutting and, again, stick that top cutting in a dark, cool place for at least 2 weeks, and then you have a new plant. So they're very easy to prop, really cool plants to experiment with, and I love them so much, even though they kind of hurt you.
Is there a way to encourage buds or branching without cutting?
With cactus, it's a little bit different. So with like ficus, cinnamon trees, canela, any kind of tree form, you can notch it to encourage new growth points. Now, one thing you can do that I've noticed I've accidentally done, specifically with my Peruvian apple cactus, this is my cactus that I've experimented the most with. If you want a new arm without cutting it, basically I let mine go like really dormant. So it wasn't pushing any growth from the top because cactus will just push growth primarily from up top and keep pushing through. Now, if the mother plant, so if the one column starts to basically die, I see it as more of a retirement. The cactus is retiring itself. It says, I'm done. They can sit the same size when they start to like degrade for years and years and years before they actually go. When they go, it's very, very quickly and kind of sad. But if you can somehow stop that growth for the main cactus, I've noticed with mine, it will then start pushing out new pups from down below. Kind of hard to do. I stopped fertilizing mine. And like I said, I did this on accident, and then I made it happen with a couple other plants. But I basically just neglected the mother plant for a really, really long time. And then it pushed new pups without having to cut it. You could probably cut part of it, like how you notch with ficus. I haven't actually tried that. Now I'm going to have to experiment with that to see if it does promote growth out of the side of the plant. But I do know, like when they've been damaged before, if they've fallen or something has fallen on them and they got damaged on the side, all they're going to do is callus and cork and not push new growth from that spot. So they need that energy to be going actively to that one specific spot to start pushing new arms and new pups, instead of the energy still going to the top of the cactus and, basically scabbing that wound over. So it's a fun thing to experiment with. Cactus do crazy things, so I might have to try notching and see what happens with that. Any more questions, Tyler?
No, we're good.
All right. It's pest talk time now. And one of the joys to cacti, one of the many joys to cacti, is they are a little more pest resistant than your leafy plants. They don't tend to get as many pests. They're not big pest magnets because they don't have those leaves for like spider mites, thrips to feed on, though they can still get them. But the pest that you'll primarily get with your cacti is going to be scale, number one, and mealybugs. Now, scale is a little rampant with cacti. Scale tends to love them, but it's really easy and kind of fun to treat depending on the type of cactus you have. So when I say scale, and I wish I had an example of it, if you start noticing little white, tan, it's the color they are most of the time, though they can be black and red, specks on your cactus. Let's get this little euphorbia up here. So the scale will start forming usually in that little crease, and you'll start to see little tiny specks, and they'll start to grow bigger and it'll start to spread. Some scale will get real large and really gross, and some stays pretty small. If I were to have a pest on my cactus, that's what I would choose because, like I said, it's easy to treat and it can be kind of fun. So it's going to take over your cactus pretty slowly when it starts, and then it'll take off and happen fairly quickly. Now, what I suggest doing with it is first killing the scale. You can kill it by applying neem oil, rubbing alcohol. I mean, you can use a synthetic pesticide to kill it, but then you're going to want to get that scale off. Like I said, importantly, kill it first before you get it off, because if you get it off while it's still alive, you might just make it spread to other things, whether it's inside or outside. So we want to kill that scale first, and then afterwards you can take a toothbrush or a Q-tip or I usually use like a microfiber cloth to just wipe the dead scale off. And if you have a larger cactus or they start to get into the spines, I found this nifty little hose attachment, little tiny pressure washer on the internet. Tyler helped me get it. And I will use this. It's a soft spray, so then it will spray that dead scale off. You can get into the crevices. I mean, when the scale gets up top, it's really hard to treat and get out with a rag and even a toothbrush. But if you take that little water spray, you can usually spray it all off. It might take a couple tries, let it dry out, check and see, maybe retreat it to make sure you killed off that scale, spray it out again. I said pressure washer. It's not necessarily like a full-blown pressure washer, which can, strip the paint off of furniture and destroy everything. So if you have a pressure washer at home and a big cactus, not a good idea to use that pressure washer on. Just get like a little hose attachment that you can spray, and it should just knock that scale right off. And then the second one that I'm really going to touch on, mealybugs. Those can be a little harder to get rid of on your cactus. They do like to cluster at the spines, so it's the worst, especially if you have a really spiny cactus. And they can blend in because they look kind of like the color where those spines are coming out, and they'll nestle themselves in there and start nesting and then just take over. So if you start noticing white kind of
Caroline.
There we go. A white kind of cottony look near in the spines, you might have mealybugs. Now, if you don't have a lot of spines that you have to work through, Q-tip dipped in rubbing alcohol will take care of them on contact. You can also spray it down, wipe it down with neem oil. You can use that water sprayer technique that I did talk about with the mealybugs. It's not going to be quite as helpful as it is with scale or as fun. But you always have, systemic. I mean, you can use systemic or synthetic treatment for it. But hopefully the rubbing alcohol or neem oil will take care of it in a few rounds. It's going to kill those bugs on contact. It's not going to control. It's just going to kill them when it hits their bodies. It's going to start dissolving them and take them out. So hopefully you catch it early and you're able to kill them. My mom has mealybugs on one of her plants, and she was like, "It's so sad that I have to kill them." Not really. They're terrible, evil little things. So mealybugs and scale. And like I was talking about with that question about corking on the Thanksgiving cactus, if you have what you think might be a pest, you can always take a photo. I suggest taking a photo, bringing it into the nursery, and we can help ID what that problem is, or you can email it to us and we can take a look. It really helps for us to be able to see photos. I mean, you can describe it. Usually we're like, oh, it sounds like mealybugs. It sounds like spider mite. It could be some kind of blight. But being able to see the problem instead of hear about it will really help us. So if you're not sure what is going on with your cacti or any plant, feel free to take a photo, bring it in, or email us that. All right.
Got a question from the At Home Show page.
Oh, I'm ready.
If you haven't already discussed, what's the secret to Christmas cactus success?
So it took me a while to figure out my Christmas cactus. Like I said, I got one at a yard sale from a nice elderly lady, and I've had a few here and there throughout my plant life. I've noticed with mine, I need to pick one spot and leave it there through the winter. I do put mine out on my front porch in the summer where it doesn't get any direct sunlight. And they do, so with them. And I think I did a webinar on holiday houseplants possibly where I talk about Christmas cactus, Easter cactus, and getting them to bloom. Now, people say that Christmas and Easter cactus are the same. They are actually not the same. They have some slight differences in the ridges on their leaves and the way their bloom looks, but their care is the same. So if you're asking about getting it to bloom, it has to go through periods of darkness. So you can either put it in a closet, or I suggest just taking a box, putting it over that to say goodnight, night-night plant, and letting it rest in complete darkness. Even if you're like, well, there's no natural sunlight, it's just a lamp, don't even mess with that. You want complete darkness for usually about like 10 hours at least a day. And it takes a few weeks of like keeping it in darkness, then taking it out, or you can just leave it in darkness. I've also noticed this happens with bromeliad. There's a lot of plants that you just put in darkness. It gives it time to think about life and say, here I go. I'm going to be beautiful and push these blooms out that will pollinate and hopefully I'll make babies one day. I don't know. That's how I see it happening. And I had talked about that with a couple of my cactus in order to get them to bloom. So like I said, they need to have periods of darkness in order to get them to bloom, and they will normally bloom whichever type of cacti you have around Christmas or Easter. Now, if you're just talking about general care, they are an epiphyte, so they don't like direct sunlight. Cactus is in the name, but they're not really a cactus. They're not like the cacti we have been discussing. They don't like any direct sunlight. If they get direct sunlight, they're going to turn like a reddish brown, then they're going to turn a brown color, and then they're going to turn a really light brown, and then all their leaves are going to fall off. All those segments are going to start dropping. So they like bright indirect light. If you think about a rainforest, you think about all those amazing canopies. A lot of sunlight does not reach those plants that are growing on the forest floor or even the epiphytes that are growing up in the trees because of that canopy. So this is the kind of climate you want to work for your Christmas cactus. It also likes more water than your standard typical cacti. You don't want to let it completely dry out like I was talking about with watering cactus. They like to stay more wet. And one thing I have recently started doing with my Christmas cactus is giving it coffee every now and again. And I have noticed a big difference in the color of the leaves and with the blooms. So I will usually kind of really dilute my coffee and give it some coffee like every couple weeks. I think that's very interesting. So yeah. Great question. I love talking about that.
Caffeinate your Christmas cactus. That's the message.
They love caffeine. I've also read, I haven't tried it, but I've read about that with African violets and pothos. Now, like I said, I haven't tried it. And when you experiment with stuff like this, always know that you run the risk of possibly damaging your plant. And there's a lot of opinions and, thoughts on plants. I say you can read on plants all day, which I do. And a lot of people here at the nursery, we all love plants. We read books, we read articles, we watch videos, we watch movies about plants. But also the other side to it is physically doing it. I've been growing cactus since I was a kid. I love houseplants, and a lot of my knowledge has come from actually working hands-on with my plants and seeing what they can do, what they like, what they don't like. And depending on your climate, your home, the sun it's getting, the same plant could have very different needs. If Tyler had, this cactus that's sitting in front of me at his house and I had mine at my house, what we're doing could be different. Because the climate can be so different. You think you both live in Middle Tennessee, you both live in a house that gets some sun. But we keep our AC at a different setting. Our humidity in our house is different. We talk to our plants differently. I sing to my cactus every night. No, I don't.
I'm a bit of more of a goo goo gaga baby talker.
But you learn a lot from experimenting and just, hands-on learning. You learn from trying, and you will kill some plants. I've killed a lot of plants, especially heartleaf ferns. They hate me. I think they hate everyone. I think they hate themselves and they just want to die. But you will kill some plants. It doesn't mean that you're a bad plant person. It doesn't mean that you don't have a green thumb. I think that's a lie. You will learn your mistakes from, killing your plant or almost killing it, watching it rot. You might have sprayed your cactus with a mister for the last year, and then now it has all these black fungal dots on it, and you don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. from giving it too much moisture. So yeah, like I said, just learning through experience, and also reading helps. And nurseries all around the country and the world are full of plant people like me and Tyler who are here to help you along your plant journey.
Somebody chimed in with espresso.
Probably.
Give it a
you
shot.
might want to give it a shot. That was a good one, Tyler. Whoa. Yeah, plants are crazy, crazy creatures that keep this planet the beautiful thing that it is. So that about wraps it up for my webinar here,
Okay.
talking about growing cactus indoors and some outdoors. And like I said, if you want to come talk cactus more, feel free to come into the nursery. We love to talk about plants. So do we have any more questions before we wrap it up?
No, but this is your last chance. Last call for questions.
I'm so ready. I could do a Q&A all day long. We can do a little plant tour while we wait.
Yeah, let's do that.
So old man cactus, like I was talking about with my estate sale cactus, there are so many different varieties. I have a lot of cactus books, and there are cactus scientists out there who have not ID'd all the cactus. I mean, there's hybrids. There's a lot. So if you don't know what cactus you have, don't be like, I don't know, I'm so embarrassed. I mean, I have cactus and I'm not sure what they are, and I research all the time. But in front of me, usually these furry little guys are called old man cactus, which I love. I have a lot of different varieties of my old man, old woman cactus. Some are old woman, some are old man. This is a ladyfinger cactus right here in front. This is a euphorbia. This is a golden barrel. It's got a nice round. We were talking about fertilizing, and just to touch on that, usually like the round barrel-esque cactuses, not necessarily this one, but these two, like the domino cactus and the blooming little Easter cactus, they like to be fertilized a little bit more because they are more heavy bloomers. Peruvian apple cactus, which is one of my personal favorites, it grows the fastest out of most cactus that I have. It flowers, it attracts bats, it gets really big, and it's very easy. I've never had any problems with mine. In front of that is the amok euphorbia. Not a true cactus, but still looks like one. In front, we didn't really talk about it, but some people call it orchid cactus. It has these nice little leaves, and it will bloom. Usually they're going to be a white or red bloom, and they need to be really, really root bound to bloom. So if you ever get one, just leave it in that pot for like 50 years, and then it might bloom.
Ugh.
We've got Mexican fence post cactus over here, which I love. I have one of those. And then the Gomi blue prickly pear. And this is a Sonora cactus right here. Also, I think people call it giant cactus. I mean, it gets big. Probably here in Tennessee, if you had one inside, it's not going to get 30 feet tall, but it will get big. You'll be surprised. Before I started working at the nursery, I would go to Home Depot, Lowe's, where they have those little tiny cactus. And I got some in those little 2-inch pots that are now at least this size. So they're not throwaway cactus. A lot of times I feel like people get them and they're like, I put them in my bathroom. It doesn't get light. And it sat there for months, and then all of a sudden it died. It's because it didn't get light. Cactus will basically go dormant, and they can live for years and years on neglect. But when they die very quickly, and like a matter of days sometimes. Your cactus will look great. You won't know that it's not getting the right light or the right water. And then all of a sudden from the inside, those cells just disappear because it's not able to retain that water anymore, or it's not getting enough light, and it'll shrivel up and then just be a bunch of spines left, which is kind of cool, but very sad. So love your cactus, give them the right light, right water, and then neglect them a little bit, and they will do great for years and years to come. All right. Well,
and a question, or I guess a comment. When I was a boy, my grandmother used to make candy from some type of cactus. Which type is that? And I went ahead and did a little googly Google.
Ooh.
And it's looking like it's actually prickly pear.
That's what I was going to say. More than likely prickly pear.
It's made from the fruit of the prickly pear cactus.
Definitely the most edible cactus. You can really eat all part. I mean, you don't want to eat the spines of the prickly pear. Yeah, you can get pickled prickly pear. Like we were talking about, you can eat the fruit if you're so lucky as to get fruit from your prickly pear. It can grow outside. The fruit is great. Mine fruits, like I said, I don't think it's fruited this year, which I'll have to go home and check. The fruit's great. I never tried to make candy out of it. So if I do get fruits, I might try to do that. But the pads are also edible. You'll remove the spines. There's a couple great restaurants on Nolensville Pike that I go to that serve like whole prickly pear pads. You can also get it pickled at the grocery store in a jar. So really, really good plant to grow.
Comment from Josh Carey.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah. Carrie Gant needs safety glasses.
I've never gotten a spine in my eye before, but I do have some pretty cool sunglasses that I can put on for you, Josh. So these keep my eyes nice and safe while I work in the nursery.
And speaking of protection, how do you handle cactus safely? Are there special gloves?
Wow. We did not talk about repotting cactus.
Oh, no.
This webinar is going to go on forever. There are gloves you can get. I usually get like heavy duty work gloves when I'm handling my cactus. It can actually be pretty dangerous to repot big cactus. I almost had one fall on me last year. And that, I mean, it wouldn't have taken me out. I'm much tougher than that, but it would have left a lasting impact. That's for sure. But I suggest just like a heavy duty leather work glove. Those spines, they can still get through like the big long spines. I mean, like this golden barrel, if you notice, it's got just gnarly spines that can basically pierce anything. Prickly pear, there are some varieties that have big ones and then little tiny ones that just get into your skin. But when you go to repot them, small or big, what I usually use is styrofoam. So I will save styrofoam from the nursery or, when I get something shipped to me, and I'll wrap it with the styrofoam and then a blanket around it to really protect myself and the cactus. Because, the spines look cool. You don't want to break them all off. Though I have seen a technique where you can burn them off, but that seems a little bit cruel. So when I go to repot, I'll do the styrofoam, I'll wrap it in a blanket, I'll lay it on its side if it's really, really big. And if it's big with lots of arms, I'll also put styrofoam in between those arms so it doesn't get crushed in on itself. So it basically holds that shape, lay it on its side. You can hit the pot, kind of, shake it off of there. And then if it's a big cactus, you'll want to have more than 2 people. And then you should have enough styrofoam and packing around it to where you can pick it up while wearing those leather gloves, without piercing yourself, and then put it in that pot. And just touching on repotting cactus again, I was going to talk about it, but I knew this webinar could go for 4 hours because this is my favorite topic to discuss. Some of my cactus have gotten so incredibly large that I don't want to put them in bigger pots. I mean, I have one that's probably like 23 inches across in diameter. That's a big pot when you have to bring all these plants inside in the winter. So when I go to repot it, which I have before, I've taken it out of the pot the same way I talked about, styrofoam, wrapping it in blanket so it's nice and snug, but it's not scarring itself or you. Lay it on its side, bring it out. And then what I will do is cut the roots. I'll break out all that soil, take all the old soil off, remove a good amount of the roots, and then just put it back in the same pot with new soil.
Would a good amount be like a third?
A third, yeah. Maybe no more than a third. I mean, you could, let's be honest, you could remove all those roots and it would be fine. So, but I usually, like Tyler said, about a third of it I'll take off. And then I'll just reuse that pot, and it does great. It'll react to it just like I was potting it up into a bigger pot. But like I said, they'll get to a point where you can't go any bigger unless you build a bigger house. So,
Okay, a couple more here. Lots of interaction. Thank you, everybody, for doing that. We appreciate your questions and your comments. Miriam Mims on the At Home Show page commented, during droughts in Texas, ranchers would burn the spines off of prickly pear so the cattle could graze them. And then a question from Facebook, Bates page, how often do you water ladyfinger cactus, for example, and Christmas cactus? So just an example.
So yes, good question. There's so many different kinds of cactus that you'll want to research yours specifically. So ladyfinger cactus and Christmas cactus are going to have very different watering needs. Ladyfinger cactus needs to dry out. It doesn't want to sit wet. It doesn't want to stay moist. It needs to be in a nice dry soil mix. And it's hard to say what watering schedule you should use, because that's going to differ on the climate, the environment in your house, and also the type of soil you use and the size of the pot it's in versus the size of the plant. But wait for that soil to dry out. A good rule of thumb, like I discussed earlier in the webinar, is once you see that soil with your ladyfinger cactus starting to pull away from the pot, so there's space between, that's a good rule of thumb. It's letting you know that that soil is completely dry and it's time to water. Go ahead and thoroughly water it. Now, with your Christmas cactus, they don't like to dry out a whole lot between waterings. Now, you don't want to set it in water. It doesn't need to be wet all the time. But I would say Christmas cactus is almost on par with watering like a philodendron if you're a low waterer like myself. I let my philodendron dry out pretty slightly, a little more than slightly before I water it. But I am watering my Christmas cactus a lot more often than my like ladyfinger cacti or other cactus. So great question. And also good comment, Miriam. We were talking about burning spines for just a moment. But yeah, that is something that people do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're, hold on, let me check Zoom one more time. Yeah, we're good.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us here at Bates Nursery and Garden Center for Bates Botanical Boot Camp. I really enjoyed talking to you guys about cactus. I love them. Maybe we'll do Cactus Care 102. They're fantastic. We have a lot of really cool ones right now. And we have a lot of really great webinars coming up throughout the next few months. So check back in. If you're not getting the newsletter, make sure you subscribe. Get on that mailing list so you can learn all about our upcoming webinars and our past webinars. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks.